boys and girls, and welcome to Reader's Workshop. What's Reader's Workshop? It's a time to work on our reading skills. Great job. So this week we've been reading the story called The Biggest Pumpkin Ever. And yesterday we used a new tool from our toolbox to retell the story. And remember, retell means to tell the story again, beginning, middle, and end. And yesterday you retold the beginning of the story. We learned that there were two field mice, Clayton and Desmond, and that they discovered a little tiny pumpkin in their vegetable garden, and they both wanted to make it grow. So I think Clayton he had this great idea. He wanted to make it grow and put it in the town's pumpkin contest. And then Desmond wanted to make it grow and build a big, or create a big, beautiful jack-o'-lantern out of it. And remember, a jack-o'-lantern is just where you carve a face into a pumpkin. So that is what happened in the beginning of the story. So now today we are going to find out what's happening in the middle of the story, okay? So let's see. Let's see where we left off. All right, so we got the boys. They both discovered the baby pumpkin. That's where we left off yesterday in the garden. And now they're going to start watering it. So the next day, Clayton watered and fertilized the pumpkin again. The next night, Desmond did the same. And the pumpkin began to grow. By the end of a month, the pumpkin was so large, Clayton couldn't believe his eyes. Look at how big it's getting. My goodness, said Clayton's mother, and it's not even full grown. Clayton shrugged. All I do is water it. And Clayton's mother whispered in his ear, if you want the pumpkin to grow bigger, faster, she said, you should use sugar water. That night, Desmond brought his brother Morris to the pumpkin. Morris knew everything there was to know about growing things. That's some pumpkin, he said. Desmond shrugged. All I do is water it, he said. Morris whispered in his ear, you should try using sugar water. The next day, Clayton dug a small hole beside the pumpkin's vine. In the hole, he placed a bowl full of sugar water. He cut into the vine a few inches from the pumpkin. In the cut, he put one end of a piece of candle wick. Then he put the other end in the bowl of sugar water. And that night, on the other side of the pumpkin, Desmond did exactly the same thing. Within a week, the pumpkin was twice the size it was before. And then within 2 more weeks, it was absolutely enormous. Clayton was amazed. He ran down the road and peeked into his friend Jimmy's pumpkin patch. The pumpkin Jimmy was growing for the contest looked much smaller. Clayton scratched his head. I have an amazing pumpkin, he said out loud, and I think I'm going to win the contest. There's his friend Jimmy's pumpkin. That night, Desmond and his brother Morris spent a long time looking at the pumpkin. How do you think it got that big? Desmond asked. Morris shrugged. A little luck and a little skill. It is going to make some jack-o'-lantern, said Desmond. It sure is, said Morris. A week later, Clayton noticed the pumpkin was bigger than the family car. During the day, everyone he knew came by to admire it. And at night, all the field mice gathered around to do the same thing. By now, summer was almost over. In a week, the pumpkin would be full grown and start turning yellowish and then orange. A few weeks after that, it would be ripe and ready for the pumpkin contest. Clayton could hardly wait. The pumpkin was growing so fast. It would soon be larger than his house. Then he had a terrible thought. If the pumpkin was so big, how would he get it to the contest? It wouldn't fit in his red wagon. It wouldn't even fit in a truck. Clayton decided to worry about that when the time came. That night, the weather grew colder. Thinking there would be an early frost, Clayton rushed out to the pumpkin with his blanket. One was not enough. Soon he was rushing back and forth, carrying all the blankets from the house. As he worked, he hummed a little song, and as he hummed, he heard someone else singing. He also began to realize that someone else was covering the pumpkin with blankets. Desmond, too, had seen the change the danger of the early frost. He too had brought blankets for the pumpkin, and as he worked, he sang a little song. And as he sang, he began to realize that someone else was working and humming. Look at the two boys on either side of the pumpkin, both working, but they didn't even realize it until they just heard each other singing songs. Clayton stopped humming. He put down his pile of blankets and peered around the corner of the pumpkin. Desmond stopped singing. He put down his blankets and peered around the corner of the pumpkin. Oh, the two of them bumped heads and fell down. "You've been feeding the pumpkin," said Clayton. "You've been feeding the pumpkin," said Desmond. "That's why it got so big," said Clayton. "That's why it got so big." They both burst out laughing. So boys and girls, in the middle of our story, we read that these two boys kept watering and feeding the pumpkin. Clayton did it during the day. Desmond did it at night. They had no idea that they both were watering and feeding the same pumpkin. And then they realized once one was singing and the other one was humming that they both had been doing it. And they ran into each other and started laughing. They had no idea that both of them were doing that. And that's why they were feeding the pumpkin almost twice a day or watering it and the sugar water that it grew so big. So tomorrow we will finish our story and then we will see what happens at the end. Because remember, we are retelling it by the beginning, middle, and end. So today we learned about the middle of the story. So let's go ahead and do our drawing. So I am going to draw, let's see, the big, can we see a little bit? And I'll show you. Oh, I'm going to draw the big green pumpkin. And then we will draw both of the mice, those silly little mice. They had no idea. We'll draw them down here. They kind of ran into each other. They both have been working so hard feeding the pumpkin. We got their little ears, their little noses. We'll just draw them a smiley face. They were laughing and growing. So here we have our big pumpkin. We got our two mice, Clayton and Desmond, how they finally found out that they both had been watering the pumpkin, feeding it with sugar water, and that's how the pumpkin grew so enormous. So tomorrow, like I said, we will read the end of the story and we will find out, or we will retell the end of the story and we will see what happens with this enormous pumpkin. All right, boys and girls. So now I want you to go ahead and go on Seesaw, and I want to see your drawing of you retelling the middle of the story from the biggest pumpkin ever. Okay, have fun. Bye.